Well, good morning. Happy Tuesday, September 10th. Hey, let's talk for a second about mortgage interest rates, especially in light of what the Fed is getting ready to do on September the 18th. Everyone is anticipating the Fed is going to begin cutting the Fed funds rate, and we're seeing a lot of clients who are contemplating refinancing or contemplating that home purchase who are basically taking a wait-and-see approach because, hey, the Fed's getting ready to start cutting rates, and that's what we've been waiting on for the past 2.5 years. So why would I move now? Why would I refinance now if the Fed's going to begin cutting rates? So let's dive into the data here just a little bit and take a look at it. This is the 30-year fixed mortgage, the bellwether mortgage product in the United States. And we're going to take you all the way back into the 80s when interest rates were upwards of 10%. These gray areas are recessions. The pandemic, which turned out to be a very short-lived recession, spurred this huge increase, right, in mortgage interest rates. This is because inflation was at 40 or 50-year highs. But take a look at what's been happening of late with the 30-year fixed. It's actually been declining, and rather steeply. You can see we've gone from being north of 7% back in early summer to now getting down towards the low 6%. We've seen a tremendous improvement in the 30-year fixed over the past 60 days. So what's going on there? Well, let's take a look here really quick at the correlation or the relationship between the 30-year fixed mortgage and the Fed funds rate. So this is the Fed funds rate here in amber, and this is the 30-year fixed up here in blue. And you can see that while they're certainly related and there's sort of an indirect relationship, boy, there are times at which they just don't seem to be in lockstep with one another. Let's take a few examples. So these green areas are times in where the 30-year fixed is actually declining, but the Fed funds rate is not. These red areas are times in which the 30-year fixed is actually going up, but the Fed funds rate is not, right? They're moving in opposite directions, or at least they're certainly not correlated. Here's another time where we saw a steep increase back in 2003 in the 30-year fixed, yet the Fed funds rate was actually going down. Here's another time where we saw the 30-year fixed increasing when the Fed funds rate was in a steep cutting cycle. Could we see that again where the 30-year fixed actually goes up even though the Fed begins cutting rates? Listen, no one has a crystal ball, but it's not like it's never happened before. It certainly happened as recently as 2008, 2009. And so that brings us here where we see the 30-year fixed has been steeply declining over the past 60 days, and yet the Fed has done nothing, right? The Fed hasn't cut the Fed funds rate at all. And so if the 30-year fixed is not directly tied to the Fed funds rate, then why are we focusing on it so much? When what we really should be focusing on is the 10-year Treasury. Let's take a quick look at the 30-year fixed as it relates to the 10-year Treasury. So here's the 10-year Treasury in green, and this is the 30-year fixed in blue. And you can see that these two move in greater lockstep with one another than the Fed funds rate. This is really what you want to be watching. If you're out there contemplating a purchase or a refinance and you've got all of your attention focused on what the Fed is doing with the Fed funds rate, you're watching the wrong thing. Shift your attention to the 10-year Treasury. Why? Well, the Fed only meets 8 times per year. That means the maximum number of changes in the Fed funds rate is 8 times, unless they call an emergency session, which they almost never do. The 10-year Treasury is traded every single day, every single business day on the bond market. And you can see that as the 10-year Treasury moves, so does the 30-year fixed, almost in lockstep. They're in a bit of a slow dance. And you can see what's been happening here with the 10-year Treasury of late is that it's been doing what? It's been declining, which means what? The 30-year fixed has been declining. This is the metric that you want to be watching, not the Fed funds rate. And really, one last point about the 10-year Treasury. This is the difference or the spread between the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year fixed. Let's go back and look at this chart. You can see there's a spread between these two numbers, right? There's a difference between the two. And at times it's very narrow, like right here or here or here. It's very narrow. And at times it's very far apart, like right here. What we've seen throughout the recovery of the pandemic is a large spread between the 30-year fixed and the 10-year Treasury, and that has begun to narrow a little bit. This next chart is that spread. It actually, the higher it goes and up here, these lines go, the greater the spread, and the lower, the smaller the spread. And you can see that the spread between the 10-year Treasury and the 30-year fixed has been declining. We've recovered a lot of that loss that we experienced last year and the year before. What we can hope for with a Fed funds rate cut is not necessarily an improvement to mortgage rates because those two are correlated. They're absolutely polar opposite instruments. The Fed funds rate is an overnight lending rate. The 30-year fixed is an interest rate for 30 years. What we can hope for with a potential Fed funds rate cut is an improvement to the spreads, and that in turn may help bring mortgage rates down. But as we've seen historically, there are plenty of times where the Fed has cut the Fed funds rate and mortgage rates have actually worsened. It certainly merits taking a look at your situation and making a decision about whether you want to refinance or whether you want to purchase based upon the savings you can realize now or based upon the affordability you have now. If it's there, take it. It makes perfect sense to get on with your life and make a good financial decision. But waiting to time a Fed funds rate cut that doesn't necessarily cut to mortgage rates may in fact be a calculated error. All right, if I can be of any service to you, don't hesitate to reach out. Mark.Milam at highlandmtg.com.